and Smedley.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. First is 2 presentations about processes that we go through both in the city for condemnation of properties that are hazardous. And then also Rick Wasserman is here from the county to talk about the land bank. So first we have David Riggs from the Code Enforcement Office. He's the Code Enforcement Director to talk about condemnation and things that we do to make sure that places are healthy, safe in the city of Athens. Thank you. David, thank you for coming today.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for giving me a few minutes of time. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. I've got a little bit, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is actually a little bit of a complicated process, and I wanted to kind of go through it with you. There's blight, condemnation, and then demolition if we get that far. So if we'd start with blight, I thought the best thing we could do is look at what the definition of blight is. If I can get, there we go, screen to work. So this is our definition in the city codified ordinances. Blight's condition of decay. You can read this. I'm not going to read it to you, but you'll see here that it has to do with safety, sanitation, and there is something here at the very bottom: a significant decrease in the property values, including but not limited to graffiti in adjacent properties. So that is our definition of blight. We actually have some teeth in our code, and this is where we get this from. It's the housing chapter 29.12 premise conditions. This is a city ordinance sanitary requirements. You can see they're very specific about what they call blight, basically. You have exterior property areas that should be maintained in a clean, safe, and sanitary condition. They talk about broken and dilapidated fences, out of use or unusable appliance or automobile parts, rags, rugs, and so they're being really specific about what is considered a blight condition on a property. So I thought maybe I could go through a few things here, what I think triggers the blight process and what does not. So obviously, if you have a property that has a safety or fire hazard, whether or not it has a structure on it, you can actually have a blighted property that doesn't have a structure on it. But if there's a fire or safety hazard, that's definitely a blight, could be a blight problem. Excessive loose trash, as our definition in Title 29 says, broken or dilapidated fences, unusable appliance or automobile parts, unused rugs, rags, or materials, broken and dilapidated unusable furniture and mattresses. One of the things that we don't think triggers a blight is if you have multiple vehicles parked in the driveway, whether or not they're working, it's really difficult for us to have that considered blight, and that comes actually from the state codified ordinances or the state regulations. The other thing, it gets into whether, what some people think is a problem and some people don't. So ugly house paint, furnishing, decorations, those really don't trigger the blight process. And neither do children's toys, bicycles, play sets that are laying around in the front yard. They may look bad, but that doesn't necessarily trigger the blight process. Also, outdoor storage of construction materials, equipment, although that is time limited. So if they're out there for 10 years, that becomes a blight problem. If it's out there for 6 months or even for a year, won't necessarily be blight. And then just because a property is vacant or abandoned does not mean that triggers the blight process. And so here we go. This is our process. So what we'll do is we'll have a code officer inspect the property, usually because we get a complaint. Then the next thing we do is we notify that property owner that there's a problem, or if we found those, you go back to the, what those conditions are. So maybe there's a lot of trash in the yard, or they've got a swimming pool that's partially working and the fence is partially broken down. That would be a safety hazard. So we'd notify them and request that they comply. give them, typically if it's a first offense, we'll give them a couple of weeks, and then we'll go back and we'll re-inspect that property to see whether or not they've done anything. Hopefully just that presence of us being out there will get that taken care of, but often that doesn't happen. So we would then prepare and send out a notice of violation. We'll actually physically go to the house and post the violation on the door. If there's nobody there, we'll send out a certified letter, and that by our code requires 30-day wait to make sure that so they know about it and they've actually made some action. We go back after 30 days and re-inspect the property. If those violations still aren't addressed, then we'll go back and we'll talk to the law director and let them know that we're going to do an order to comply, and that takes another 15 days. And these are business days too, so it's not 2 weeks; it's actually 3 weeks for this. After that wait, we'll re-inspect the property, and if the violations aren't addressed, we go down the city prosecutor road, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with that. So the blight property that we'll see here, our teeth are actually going to be a fine. The first one's $150, and then that goes up from a minor misdemeanor to a fourth-degree misdemeanor, which actually could even have a jail time associated with it. But at this point, we're actually get into the legal branch, and the defendant go to the judge. We end up going, we'll go and we'll testify, and the judge will actually make a decision on that. We can repeat this process over and over again until either it gets corrected or until they sell or dispose of the property in some other way. So that's our blight process. Any questions so far?
I have a quick question. Okay, what about like standing water or septic systems that aren't working, or not septic systems, but standing water, mosquito habitat, gutters that are overflowing with tall trees growing in them, those sort of health hazards?
We think of those as health hazards, right? Yep. So if you have standing water and mosquitoes, that certainly becomes a health hazard problem. We actually work with the health department in those cases. If you have gutters that aren't working, you actually end up eventually with a structural problem on the building. So that's one of the things we look at, not just that it looks bad up there, but you'll actually get water running down the face of the foundation, and you could have foundation failure or rot there. So that's when we see that, that's one thing we'll go after and look at. So yeah, that's a great call. That's exactly what we do. Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jeff.
Assuming that the code office and your personnel go through all these steps and eventually you get to the point, step 12, how much money do you think the city has invested in just getting this far?
Yeah, it's quite a bit. So it has to be, we wouldn't typically do this and go through this whole process unless we really think there's a problem. And it's typically when you have a structural problem or a real safety issue. And I'll get to the next step of what we do after that here in just a minute. I can follow you up on what we do after this. Arian.
Thanks for being here tonight, first of all. So how is it that you find out about these properties? Is it a combination of being out and about and noticing it and complaints, or is one more often than the other?
Yeah, I'd say probably 25% of the time we'll notice something going on, and 75% of the time, just rough numbers, it'll be complaint based. So we do go out there and we do see things, but more often we'll actually get a complaint and we'll respond to that. So that's how we operate. Anybody else? So what happens if we go through this process and you can't find the property owner, or the property owner just ignores you and he builds up warrants against him? Well, we would actually, if it's a safety problem, we'd actually go to the next step, which is condemnation. And we have in our code, under the same Title 29 housing, a condemnation piece. And that's when a structure or part of a structure is unsafe or unfit for human occupancy. Then we can go through this condemnation process. And what we do there is, it's real similar. We inspect the property, verify whether if we verify that it is unsafe or uninhabitable, we would have to break it into two pieces. If it's unoccupied, we notify the property. If it's occupied and it's unsafe, the tenants need to be removed from that unsafe condition, and our code says that they need to be removed within 48 hours. Now, there's a couple of pieces here. One would be whether it's a voluntary inspection or whether the occupants don't want you there. If we think that there's an unsafe condition where we have people living in a structure that might be unsafe, we need to get a warrant from the judge, and we'd have to have some reasonable cause to get the warrant, and then the judge would actually decide. We'd have to have the police come. That doesn't happen very often. It has happened, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually it's an unoccupied structure, and so we notify that property owner in writing and allow them time to correct the safety problems. We'll re-inspect, just like we did in the previous conditions. If they still aren't complying, then we have a process where we go through the law office, prepare an affidavit and record it at the recorder's office. We'll then placard the structure as being unsafe. And that's not the same. You'll see these placards on some of our structures that are going through the condemnation process, and it'll have a big red X on it. That's actually a placard that the fire department puts up to indicate that it's unoccupied and it might be unsafe for a firefighter to go inside. So if there's a fire that occurs there, they don't have to risk their lives going in and searching for people. That's not the same placard that we have. This is a different one, but placard says that it is unsafe or unfit for habitation. That placard will go on and it'll stay on until until the structure is repaired. So this would be like a foundation that's failing, a roof that's failing, some really significant stuff. So we can go through this condemnation process, and we could get stuck here, because the next step after this, if the homeowner, if it's a really uninhabitable, unsafe property, and the owner isn't going to repair it, the only thing we can do then is try to go through the demolition process. So before I get there, did anybody have any questions on this section? So we did blight, goes to condemnation. Beth?
Thank you, and thank you again for being here and talking with us this evening. I'm just curious, it sounds pretty good that tenants would be removed within 48 hours if it's unsafe, but is it possible that it had been unsafe for a long time as you go through all those 30 days and 15 days, and would those tenants be unsafe?
So back to the blight. Yeah, if it's unsafe and it's occupied, we really want to try to remove those tenants from that property. We would end up working with the health department to do that. I don't think we've ever run into that situation.
Okay.
That I know of.
But those tenants wouldn't have to wait 45 plus days then to get help getting removed and to get.
Yeah, if it's a safety problem. Now there are some caveats here in our code, so I don't want to go into the weeds too far, but if it's a problem that the tenants created, then the tenants are responsible to move out and pay for the move out and everything. If it's an issue that the landlord has allowed and created, then the landlord is responsible to move those tenants and find a place for them, and he has to pay for that. So there is kind of there is some language in our code that actually helps tenants that don't really have any control and they're in a really bad situation.
Okay, thank you.
So if we've got a property that is in bad repair, it's unsafe, we've placarded it as uninhabitable, we can then go to the demolition process. And this is Chapter 2906. We get the right, or we have the ability to declare a structure unfit for human occupation, and then we would go to the section to see if it can be repaired. And that is this part of the section. So what we would do is we would condemn a structure and then hire an appraiser that the city would have to pay for to get a cost to repair. Find and also see if the county auditor, see what that value is, make sure that it's up to date, and then get reasonable repair estimates. We actually get these not from contractors, but from the appraiser. They've been able and willing to give us a cost estimate for the current value of the house as well as a repair value. Then we have to do a little bit of a calculation and see if the repair cost is more than 130% of the appraised value or the auditor's valuation. And if it is, then the repair of that structure is considered by the city to be unreasonable. It's not worth doing. You'll put more money into the property than you'll ever get out of it. If that's the case, then we can follow up and go down through the demolition, get costs for demolition work, get a contractor out there, and deem the structure to be demolished. If for instance the repair costs doesn't exceed 130% of the property values, we're stuck. We really can't do anything except rare cases, and I wouldn't typically recommend that. We would go to eminent domain. That would be the next step. That's people do that, but it's difficult to do. So we could actually get to this point where we can't demo the structure. We've placarded it, and we're kind of just stuck with that structure. And this would be maybe someplace where we want to have some conversations with Mr. Wasserman at the land bank, or maybe even before this. I really hate to see a structure demolished, especially some of these old, beautiful. If we could find any way, and that's what we really try to do, to find any way that we can to get the property owner to either sell the property or fix it up, because some of these properties are really beautiful and just hate to see them demolished. I got one more slide here, and then I could entertain questions, and that would be eminent domain. And this is something I'm not sure we would ever want to do, but it's out there and available for us. And this is through the Ohio Revised Code, and it actually originally comes from the Fifth Amendment, where the government can take properties. You can, if you follow everything right, take a blighted parcel and take it by eminent domain. So that's my presentation. How about questions?
If somebody is in a house and it is falling down around them, but they can't afford to do anything, how does that factor into? There are grants or sort of things to help?
Yeah, we're assuming this is the owner of the house and they're living there and they can't afford to fix it up. Maybe
they're older or unemployed or something.
That I don't really I haven't really come across. That would be something we wouldn't typically want to just evict them and make them leave without some provisions. We don't have anything in our city code that would follow up with that, but I know there are some not-for-profit organizations that can help in the area, and we would probably want to contact them, see how they could help us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other questions?
Mayor?
Oh, sorry. Did you have one more slide?
I think this was it. Oh, no, sorry, I did have one more slide. Thank you. Sorry, Mayor?
Not necessarily a question for David, but it's a response to Member Fall's question that there are programs through the Hocking Athens Perry Community Action for improvements. There are diminishing loans as well. As long as someone lives there for a certain amount of time, that it essentially is forgiven at the end or significantly reduced. So there are some programs. It's a great question, Member Fall, because I've often thought about it, but there are programs through HAPCAP that I would like to mention to people who might be interested in something like that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So sorry, one more slide here. I wanted to show you where we are with our cases. We had 14 or 15 of them over the last several years. 14 Blick was a trailer, was in really bad repair. That actually got removed. Some of these are basically wins. We had the property went to sale and somebody bought it and they're trying to fix it up. 1010 and 1012 Cook, I was actually involved in, and they voluntarily, the owners voluntarily demolished the structures, and now they're for sale. So that might be a really good. I think they were residential structures in a business zone. So that's basically I think a win for us. Others, it was 9 Atlantic has a structural problem. There are some owners that are working on repairs, so we were moving down the demolition condemnation process. Somebody bought it and they're trying to fix it up. So we're keeping the orange ones, we're kind of keeping on the radar, hoping that they will get them repaired and fixed back up. And then of course the yellow ones here are the ones that are still open that we're working on. 38 Brown would probably be the next one we'd really want to have make some decisions on. And 133 Lancaster, we've been looking at, but I wanted to wait and see what the land bank wants to do with that property before we move forward on demolition. So those will be the two top properties that we would be moving on. 11 Atlantic, they're slowly working on that, but they are making some progress. So. We're doing okay. There could be more that we would add on here. And if you have any properties that you think would need to be in either the blight or the condemnation category, please let the office know, and we'll certainly take a look at them and see what we can get accomplished. Thanks for your time. If anybody has any questions.
I have one more quick question, and maybe you mentioned it, I missed it. When it comes to time to talk about demolition, where does the cost of that fall?
The city would end up, we'd pay for the appraisal. We would end up paying for the demolition, and then that money would go onto the tax records for the property, so that if somebody was going to buy that in the future, they'd have to pick up those costs.
Director Riggs, thank you for coming tonight. Just looking at this last slide and just doing a little bit of math, it looks like from inspection date to completion date, we're about 10 months. It seems like this process takes.
Yeah, at the quickest. Usually it takes longer than that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a fast process, and most of these that we have on here, they were vacant, unoccupied, and we had the time to be able to let the property owner either try to fix it or go through this lengthy process. So that's been good for us.
So it's a combination of the complex process behind it, and then working with the owners that would account for the timeline.
Yeah, it is a process. You'll have to, if you're going to condemnation and demolition, you have to get the appraiser to come in. You might have to go to the judge to get a warrant multiple times to have that done. And that all takes time to do. Much better if you can get the owners to either sell or fix the property up. That's the cheapest, easiest, quickest way for us to get improvements.
I think one thing that is important, that if you run into like a hoarder problem or something, that you can also find help for the person, because you are going into this situation and you have that ability to match them up with certain services, because I think that's an important thing for people to understand.
You're right, it is. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Great advice. Thank you.
Other questions?
Just a
I
comment.
can see you all.
Just a quick comment. Just looking at the addresses of the open cases, it appears that most are on the west side. That's correct. Does that happen often? Is that a trend in your time with the office?
They have been. That doesn't mean that that's where they'll always be, but that's an older part of town. The near east side's probably newer. This is one of the older parts of town. And then just some people will buy property and just won't fix it up. So you end up with property owners that are like that.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Flip through here. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, David, coming forward with this. I think that it's a really important thing is that we're not doing this as a city because we want to open up housing or something, but we're protecting the health and safety of our citizens. If there is, there are a whole lot of other things that happens with bad housing. So I think that it's really important that people understand and that they have a lot of choices as a homeowner to be able to work with you if there's problems. And I think that's a really important thing to let people know. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. Thanks. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah. Was there a chat question? I don't know. Okay. That's all the questions that we have. Thank you very much for coming by.
Anytime you guys have any questions about this, please feel free to call the office, okay? More than happy to talk with you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So now we have Rick Wasserman, who is the Athens County Treasurer. And one of the programs that I've really appreciated for Athens County is the land bank, which was started by Bill Bias when he was treasurer. Very forward thinking, and I like to think of that as Bill's help for the county. And Rick, when you came on board with your candidacy and your winning, has made it into an even bigger project and program that's been helping a lot of county townships and people. So welcome, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to address you all. I'm always happy to speak to a council, especially one as big and as important as Athens City Council. So I'm going to be very brief because I was asked to be very brief. So I'm going to give you like the quickest 5-minute overview of what we do and the differences between how a code enforcement approaches dilapidation and delinquency and how the land bank does, and then talk just a little bit at the end about ways in which we can work together. So the land bank, officially known as the Athens County Land Reutilization Corporation, was incorporated by the county commissioners and the treasurer in 2018. And we were pretty late to the game. Most of the other counties of note in the state had a land bank for a couple of years by that point. There are some very interesting nuances about how land banks work, but I'm not going to get into those. I want to leave you with one main thought as regards the land bank. The land bank is a tool to address properties that no longer have value. Land bank is a tool to address properties that no longer have value. You're sitting there, you're Athens City Council people, you're saying, how can a property not have value? Land always has value. Well, the truth is, in the Athens City firmament, that is almost always true. I can barely think of a single parcel in the city of Athens that doesn't have value. But when you go to other places in the county where you might have $20,000 in delinquent taxes and assessments on a parcel, in addition to a structure that needs to be torn down for $12,000, $15,000, you're starting in the hole by $35,000, and you may be looking at a parcel that has $5,000 worth of value. So it's what some people would call upside down or underwater. And in those cases, it's useful to have a land bank because the secret sauce of the land bank is that once we acquire a parcel, whether we acquire it by foreclosure, by a donation, or by buying it, we can eviscerate the taxes that are on that parcel. In other words, we can extinguish the taxes and reset the tax base of that parcel back to zero. And then it might be possible to find someone, an entrepreneur, a business, a nonprofit, to take on that parcel, remediate whatever its hazard might be, tear down the structure, whatever it is, and then first start the process of building something new. So the reason the land bank does not do a lot of work in the city of Athens is that you virtually never have a parcel in the city of Athens that has no value left. So the negative value concept is really important. I mentioned that the land bank has some special powers. When we get involved with a parcel, we can reset the taxes and the assessments to zero. Assessments are a huge deal in other parts of the county where you have sewer systems that were installed with federal government money, and the sewer system is required to send a bill every single month to that parcel, whether someone's living there or not. And very often in Trimble Township, when we foreclose on a parcel, there's $12,000 in delinquent taxes, and fully 60 or 70% of it is sewer fees. So we have the ability then to get rid of that. We also have numerous other things under the law that help us do our job. So the difference between what a code office does with condemnation and what the land bank does, in the first part, I realized that it looked like that condemnation process was really long, but that's actually pretty fast action compared to a foreclosure. So you can get involved with a condemnation, and I see them do it in Nelsonville pretty frequently, where they can do 2 or 3 months when it's an abandoned building and get it to the point where they can go in and board it up so that people can't go in and do all the things that people do in abandoned buildings. Whereas the quickest foreclosure I've been party to is about 6 months, and that's really quick. I mean, we can get them done in less than 9. That's really significant. So a land bank property has to be both tax delinquent and abandoned. And abandoned does not mean the same thing as vacant. Abandoned means there's no owner. There's nobody left really taking care of it. There's nobody doing anything with this property. It's not just nobody's lived there for the last 3 months. So it has to be both tax delinquent and abandoned. And a lot like how the IRS got Al Capone, tax delinquency is how the land bank gets its properties. We go in and we file a tax foreclosure case. And we go in and we are able to get the property in that way. The other big difference between condemnation and how the code office has to go about things and what we do at the county level is condemnation can remediate the immediate hazard. You can board the building up. You can get the tenants out. You can do the things that you have to do to make it a safe and secure situation for the neighborhood. But condemnation does not change the ownership situation of the building. So you might have a building that's sitting there, now it's boarded up, nobody can go in it, but it's still sitting there, and nobody can go in and change that situation. In order to change ownership, there either has to be a sale or a foreclosure. And so that's like one of the things I spend most of my time on is managing foreclosure cases. I have probably 60 or 70 going at any one time. Most of them are land bank cases. Most of them are situations of abandoned properties where there hasn't been an owner for 10 years or more. Nobody's paid property taxes on it. It's just sitting there completely delinquent. Steve knows a lot about this. I didn't mention that the land bank is not a governmental organization. It's a private nonprofit that was started by the commissioners. We have a board of 5 people, all of whom are elected officials, 2 county commissioners, myself, the mayor of the largest city in the county, which is Steve, and a township trustee, in our case, Greg Andrews from out in Waterloo Township. And the land bank runs basically like a nonprofit. We have a public meeting every month. We do our business in the open. Now we do it by Zoom. We used to do it by, meeting live, but that was so long ago. And we make decisions every month about how we're going to handle individual situations, individual properties. So what do we do within the city of Athens? As the land bank, not much. There isn't much that the land bank can help you with in the city of Athens unless we find a property that just simply has no value anymore. But as treasurer, I can work with the code director, and I would love to address certain situations like, for instance, the ones that are going on with Mr. Novak on the west side. So I currently have the properties on North Lancaster on my foreclosure list. I've been waiting for quite a while for the prosecutor to file foreclosure there. Zach, who's now gone on to become judge, was pretty busy the last 6 or 8 months that he was there. The new guy who took his place is really starting to focus in on this stuff, and I'm hoping to get those cases into court within the next 3 or 4 months. Once that happens, we can then bring them eventually to a sheriff's sale. The reason why we would do that instead of taking it through the land bank is that once the property goes to the land bank, the taxes are gone and we never have any hope of recouping any of that money that's owed. So in the case of the North Lancaster properties, you've got property taxes. You also got $9,000 owed to the city for demoing that one house. And certainly we would like to recoup that money if we can. We want the school district to get their share. 35 cents of every tax dollar that's paid in property taxes goes to the county to support 911 and the senior citizen programs and all the stuff the county does. About 6 or 7% goes to the city. So we want to recoup that money if we can. So taking a property through the land bank essentially means kissing that money goodbye. And I'm pretty reluctant to do that if I believe the property would sell at a sale. So my hope with the North Lancaster properties in particular is that we'll get a foreclosure. Foreclosure squashes any other liens. Then it goes to a sheriff's sale. Somebody comes along and buys it. And part of the minimum bid on that sheriff's sale is all that taxes and all of those assessments that might be owed on it. That's the main thing, I guess, that I wanted to say. I had spoken a couple of times to the previous code director about working together on these things. That's how 9 Atlantic came to my attention. I was able to get 9 Atlantic to a sheriff's sale through taxis. We had sold liens on that property a number of years ago, and I pushed them very hard to get that to a sale so that the ownership could change there because the previous owner was just not going to fix that situation up. And same thing with any other properties in the city. There was a property on Brown Avenue that we had a foreclosure on that was owned by Tom DeBeck. He came in and he paid off all the taxes on it. So once somebody does that, I no longer have much jurisdiction. So I'm hoping, I've spoken to Mr. DeBeck about fixing up his property and getting it to somewhere where he can sell it. It's full of stuff from the old West End bar. He hasn't been in it for a number of years. And I'm hoping that he will follow through with that and do something with that property. But like 9 Atlantic, it's good if we can get it to a sale and somebody else takes it over. So that's my spiel, pardon the expression. I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk about any other specific property that you know of that we need to be looking at.
Beth?
Thank you so much, Treasurer Wasserman, for coming and sharing this information this evening. I was wondering, when you were defining an abandoned property, you said that the way that the land bank considers a property to be abandoned is if you can't find the owner. But what if people are living there? How does that affect the process, and what kind of rights do the tenants have?
Well, it's just simply not abandoned if people are living there.
Okay.
Not abandoned.
It has to be no people and no owner.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if it's got people living in it, it's by definition not abandoned, and we cannot work through the land bank. As treasurer, I can foreclose on a house that has people living in it, and that happens occasionally. But we can't use the land bank in that situation.
But the county health department, the city county health department, does have some jurisdiction over unhealthy situations. If it's
Similar to a code office, the county health department and a health board in particular, not really the department, but the board of health, can create an order and then have that order enforced to essentially do the same thing as a condemnation. And they do in some cases.
Right.
Yeah. Ariana, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Really informative, answered a lot of my questions. The presentation did made me think of another one, though. So we have a lot of formal opportunities to intervene, tax delinquency or visible dilapidation that would allow us to step in or force us as a government to step in. But then we enter this place when someone pays up their taxes, they say they're going to do some work, and they might do some work, but maybe time will pass. And I guess we enter in a space of balancing, allowing the owner to make some improvements, but not wanting to bully them. And I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't know if you guys can talk a little bit about how do you manage that, and at what point do we need to do more as a government to ensure your neighborhoods remain safe and not have blight in them, essentially? I don't know. I'm sure that's a difficult thing to balance.
Director Riggs, that's much more of a code enforcement issue than it is something from what I do.
Yeah, Councilmember Smedley, one of the things that we have to look at is you're right, there is this balance between property owner rights and the rights of the community, and it's a balancing act for us to try to figure out what makes the most sense. We do have people that don't like their neighbor, or they think their neighbor is a slob and they want them to fix up their property. But in some point, the property owner is allowed to do kind of what they want to do, as long as they're not causing health or safety issue. And that's really where I kind of draw the line, is if it's a health or safety issue. We talked about the mosquitoes, or a sewage or something like that becomes the real issue for us. But yeah, you're right, there absolutely is. It's this balancing act between property owner rights and the rights of the community, and it's a tough balance.
I would just add to that you guys are extremely lucky that there was enough forethought to create a strong code and a strong code office. I work all over the county, out in townships and in villages that don't have code. And it's a real stumbling block to getting things done. You can play cat and mouse with a property owner for years, trying to get places that are essentially waste dumps cleaned up. And if you don't have code, it's just so much more difficult, because foreclosure is a really blunt instrument, and it's almost the only instrument that my office wields. But a code office can do a lot of things, and we've really encouraged other parts of the county to look into instituting a code office or strengthening the code office that they have in the case of Nelsonville and Albany, because it's just such a tremendous tool for finding that in between, the absolute hammer of taking a property away from somebody and doing nothing.
I'd like to jump in that property rights are not absolute in our country. They're a bundle of rights, and you have responsibilities when you are a property owner. One of those property responsibilities is to not make it an attractive nuisance, which is just so bad. And so I think that the balance that Rick and David are talking about is that with the bundle of rights, bundle of responsibilities, and it's not absolute. And so there are community levels of keeping your property up that the community has as their ability to look at health and safety and those sort of things. And so I think that helps to kind of explain some of the reasons why condemnation or foreclosure does work as a legal tool. So thank you. Pete?
Member Fall, thank you. And Treasurer Wasserman, thank you so much for coming tonight. This is kind of going back to Member Smedley and Director Riggs' comments. The land bank does look for an end user for the property. And so, please correct me if I'm wrong on anything here, but the goal is hopefully that you have somebody, an adjacent property owner or something like that will come in and absorb the costs of say the demolition or the rehabilitation of the property. Does that then give the treasurer's office additional tools or special powers then to make sure that happens?
Yeah, sure. I have a situation exactly like that this week that I was able to pull off in Nelsonville. We started a foreclosure many months ago on two properties next to each other on a street in Nelsonville. They had been drug houses. The original owner died. And through the help of a realtor in Nelsonville, we were able to find somebody who's got a backhoe and a bulldozer, and he's willing to take those properties down, and he has a special needs adult child that he's going to build a house in that spot for. So where we had two really nasty abandoned houses, through the generosity and goodwill of an end user, we're going to get, a brand new house and get that property cleaned up. So yeah, it happens all the time. I'm always looking to make deals with people who can do some good for the community at the same time acquiring a property at a really, really steep discount.
So the land bank then gives you it gives you the ability to really craft a solution based on every specific parcel.
In many cases, yeah. I mean, the individual has to be out there. I mean, there are some properties that are so difficult that, we'll probably never be able to sell them. And there are some properties we don't want to sell because they may be in flood zones and that sort of thing. But in general, I would agree with you, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And when you mentioned floodways and flood zones, there are other programs that have been used, especially in Nelsonville, to buy houses that are continually flooded, and tear them down and keep it from ever being built again. And that's one way, that's another program that people have the tool of to be able to use especially for repeated hazardous areas. So
yeah, and it sometimes the land bank can even get involved in those, like we're doing up in Trimble Village, where we acquired a whole line of properties, 16 parcels, because we could wipe the taxes off once they got them. Then we could give them to the village, and they're no longer tax delinquent. And then the village could leverage them with a FEMA grant to remediate the actual damage. And then they're deed restricted; they'll never get built on again.
Right. So. I think that's an important thing because for a lot of people, they're land rich, but maybe money poor. And the FEMA program especially helps people who are tend to hazardous zones that FEMA would be interested in tend to be lower on the income scale. And so that's a social justice issue. And I think it's also important that the process that you guys go through makes sure that the rights and responsibilities are protected of the landowner and of the community, while also giving them programs to help with this idea that we have a lot of parcels that have been mishmashed and put together in hazardous areas, or so that I think that it's an important program. So thank you. Other questions? Oh. Great. Well, thank you, David and Rick. It's been very educational. I love it. So I think maybe in the next time we should have the water purification and sewage people on in the future to talk about our lovely sewage system. No, I think it's important. So look for that, maybe a couple. So next on the agenda is a special right-of-way permit that's over in the university estates. They would like to put a guardhouse on that median, and it's in the right-of-way. So I don't see anybody here from that, which is unfortunate because I had some questions. All the paperwork has been signed. It's no problem. They used to have a gazebo there, I think, at one point, kind of in that median. And I was just wondering why a guardhouse, guard hutch. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome, Councilmember Fall. It had been a guardhouse before. It was pretty much taken out of commission by an errant driver that went right through it, or at least significantly damaged the guardhouse or guard shack. There was also a gazebo. You're not incorrect on that, but the gazebo was further up the boulevard in the median. But no, this is, as you had indicated, this is in the public right of way. It's just as you pull into University Boulevard, and it was, the foundation is still there. Someone can see it. There are utilities that guardhouse provided shelter for. So that's kind of the backstory and why it's a guardhouse.
Why? Well, because I was looking at a guardhouse and whether it's going to become a gated community, which would be odd because there's all those, public infrastructure up there. So that answered my question. Thank you, Steve. Any other questions on that? Everybody's signed off on it. Jeff?
Yeah. But what does it do? What does this function? Is it to prevent people from coming in, driving into the community? I could see that if that was a situation, they would start backing traffic up onto 682. People trying to get in, but not being able to get past the guardhouse for whatever reason. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around this. What? I mean, is it going to have a machine gun or something? What?
Steve, would you please answer that?
I assure you, Councilmember Reisner, that it isn't going to have a machine gun nest or anything of the sort. It was a simple 6 or 8 by 8 lath structure that sat there. It had windows in it. It was just that, but it was simply to protect and keep out of the elements some utilities that are inside there. Those still exist. They are now exposed to the elements or maybe under a tarp, but it's basically to replace it with what it is. It's not a gate. It's not a guard, place for someone to physically stand and keep people from entering or leaving. Equally important, Jeff. So yes, that's what it was. It's basically a decorative feature, but it doesn't impede or prohibit anyone from entering into or leaving University Estates neighborhood.
So it's a guardhouse for the utilities.
Yes.
So it's a utilitarian guardhouse. So any other questions on that one? So we'll be able to talk about this for years now. I can tell. I can just see the headlines. So thank you. And that's the end of my agenda. And I want to really say thank you to David and Rick for coming tonight. Oh, Sarah?
I just noticed that an attendee, Solveig, has a hand raised. I didn't know if she wanted to.
Oh, I can't see it. Please. That's Chris's job.
Solveig is saying it was not a usable guardhouse. As Steve said, it really only held the utilities, decorative only.
Okay.
So it's, it's aesthetic, but I must admit, I had the same questions as Councilmember Fall and Reisner. Is this a guardhouse to keep people, out, slow traffic calming? But it sounds more like, it's a utility cover. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Any other questions? Cool. Thank you very much. That's the end of my agenda.
Thanks, Councilmember Fall. We'll move on to the Finance and Personnel Committee, and this is chaired by Councilmember Crowell and joined by Councilmembers Reisner, Patsas, and Smedley.
Thank you, President Isley. First item on our agenda tonight is 2021 staffing levels. We have a couple of things to make sure we get updated ASAP. So we will be discussing doing these under suspension and emergency next week. The first is the labor supervisor for the streets department in the city of Athens. We need to discuss a pay rate authorization from council to pay the individual at $27 an hour. And this individual started in December, so we would like to make this retroactive to December 21st of 2020. Are there any questions from the committee about this?
Is this a pay increase for the person, or is it just a new?
It's a gentleman who's transferring from a union to a non-union job. And the discussion with the city administration was that the $27 put them, I believe, I don't know if the mayor wants to speak to this, but put them at the proper place. I think it may have been a $1 raise, a slight raise from what they were receiving earlier, but there were different benefits in the union package maybe that were covered. Mayor Patterson?
Just to add to that, you're absolutely correct, Member Crowell. The only thing to add is that there was also an increase in the level of supervision for this particular person. So that's part of that, is that metric as we're looking at this, Member Fall.
Good question. Any other questions or comments from other council members? or committee? Okay, moving on. Another item we have under staffing levels for next week is to fix an error in our 2021 staffing ordinance. We had the mixture wrong for the program specialist in the city arts, parks, and recreation. We had Emily Beveridge's position as 75% from 271 and 25% from 270, and it actually should be reversed. So we just need to amend the staffing ordinance so that Emily's position is paid 75% out of 270 and 25% out of 271. Any questions about the staffing? Okay, great. Moving on to the internet auction. This is an annual piece of business that we must take care of. This is an ordinance that will authorize the Service Safety Director to contract with a representative to conduct our internet auctions for the unneeded or obsolete municipal property. And this is pretty much a standard ordinance. Any questions about our obsolete property? Shaking heads. Okay, thank you. Moving on to our...
Actually, Member Crown, just for the benefit of the public, perhaps, is the public able to bid in that internet auction? I mean, is that something that people would be interested in?
From my understanding, it is a public auction. I don't have any other information. I think it's open to anyone. It's under the Ohio Revised Code.
Do people have a way to...
Public auction.
Okay, I didn't mean to speak over you. I'm sorry. Do people have a way to find out what's being auctioned, to decide if they're interested in attending or participating, I guess? Online, probably these days?
Those are excellent questions. In the past, Member Clodfelder, it's been a lot of vehicles and vehicles that are past their prime. But I've actually, I assume the city puts out some sort of announcement that these auctions are going on. But I am, Member Fall, are you shaking your head? Yes, I can't tell.
I would think that Debbie Walker would know more specifically. Yes, they are open from what I understand. And that we bring up that ordinance that releases them to that auction, to whatever auction that needs to go on. So that is the public notification. So
I do know, Member Clodfelder, thank you, Member Fall, that the items have to be advertised for no less than 10 days, and that 10 working days, so not Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. So there is an advance notice about these items. Okay, no further discussion on the internet auction items. We will move on to prior year expenses. And as you might imagine, as these are prior year expenses, we will be looking next week to suspend the rules and to do these as quickly as possible. There are at least two that I'm aware of, and let's start with those two. The first is in the amount of $10,000, and this would authorize the Service Safety Director to pay the insurance deductible to JWF for services on a claim against the city. So we would want to pass this next week if possible. Any questions or comments from the committee or other members? Okay, seeing none. The second item is authorization to pay the December invoice for Athens Hocking Recycling Services for their waste and recycling services. And this obviously is a December bill that we need to authorize to pay in the amount of $141,700.
Does that need to be suspended also?
I believe that both of these do, yes.
Well, I can understand the first one, but I don't understand the second. Why would it be suspended?
Sorry, the request to suspend the rules and pass an emergency was put into the hopper when it was sent to me. So I assume that they are supporting this. I believe it's a regular invoice, so I don't see a problem with suspending and paying it. But would anyone else like to reply to that?
Well, you usually suspend when we have not yet, or when we have failed to pay a debt, or that there is an emergency to pay something, a break in the line somewhere, and we had to bring in an emergency crew from outside, and they want paid. Okay, but for the recycling center, I don't see the emergency there, other than the fact, yes, I would like to get paid in a hurry. I understand that. But on the other hand, council does have rules and protocols for passing ordinances and so on. And we've done a lot of suspensions here the last few weeks, and it's almost becoming a habit. And I think at some point we're going to have to rein it in a little bit. That's my concern here. So unless I really see a good reason that it would have to be suspended, I just don't see the need to suspend it.
I think what might be helpful is to check with the auditor on it, because we don't usually move forward on these recommendations unless they're, requesting to suspend. The other thing I'd say in favor of AHRC in this particular case is that it's a local nonprofit that, we're trying to work with for our trash. And I hear you, Councilmember Reisner. We suspended a lot
Yeah.
in the last few weeks. It is someone local, and they're small enough that I think in this particular case, since we're 30 days out, this was a December bill, and we won't be paying until mid-February. So we're looking at a 6-week lag. And they've had to pay out salary. They've had to pay out payroll to their employees. So I think might be necessary.
I agree with what some of Jeff said. Shouldn't we already know all the bills because we have a contract, and that we just kind of pay it every month as we contract with them, right? I mean, why was the bill late, or why were we late? Or if it's just one of those things because COVID, I blame everything on COVID. So
That's convenient.
The bill was on time, but the city failed to encumber the money to pay it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
And why did we as council not encumber it? Where did we drop the ball? You're muted.
You're muted, Debbie.
Yep. Push that button, Debbie.
You pushed it twice, Debbie. Push it again.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
The city department just failed to encumber the purchase order at the end of the year.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So it's an internal mistake.
It is.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying.
And I'll just say that the previous, the insurance deductible, that did come through the auditor's office. So that one, I think, has been approved from them.
Okay.
And the last item I have, and President Nisley, I'm not sure it needs to be discussed today, but you had sent me an email about the Athens Foundation, but I saw no other information about that. So maybe that can be held.
I'm not sure, Mayor Patterson, is that one moving through with payment? This was for the senior housing study.
Are you asking me if that's what this is?
No, I know that's what it is.
Oh.
And I had said that I thought originally when the invoice came in, this was a prior year bill.
It was a prior year bill, and this was one of those issues to where when we were budgeting, we did not budget for this because I personally didn't know that we actually owed this. It's a complicated story without getting into the weeds on it, but it was for that senior housing study that there were 3 entities partnering together to get that study. The city's portion was $2,200, I believe, or in that ballpark. And so that's what this is again, this too is, and the agency that was putting this together also kind of lost track of where this was and the fact that there was a bill associated with it. So this is a past year expense or past year bill also.
And that happened, also at the time that there's a transition in the staffing with the Athens County Foundation. And so they lost track, yeah.
And COVID.
And COVID.
And COVID.
Okay. And COVID. Okay. Yes, thank you for remembering that, Councilmember Crowe.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's consider that discussed. Any other questions about that? Okay, thank you. Moving on our agenda to appropriations. We have a couple of things to discuss. There are funds that are outside the general fund for administrative services. These are appropriations similar to what we've done for internal services. And there is a whole series of these appropriations from $2,681 up to $141,853. These have come through the auditor's office. They are requesting suspension next week so that they can post them to the January totals. Any questions about the general fund administrative fees?
And Councilmember
Yes.
Krause.
President Munson.
It's an internal kind of transfer.
Right. This is a transfer.
For services within the city. Yep. Okay.
Right. Okay. And the last item I have on my agenda this evening, or the last under appropriations, is the Community Development Block grant, also interfund transfers. There are 4 of these, none over $1,374. But we would like to put these in interfund transfers on the appropriation ordinance amendment next week. They're all from Fund 248. Any questions about these interfund transfers?
Do any of them need suspension?
It was not requested.
Okay, thank you.
Clerk Walker,
Debbie.
they do need to be.
They will always be on the same ordinance.
Oh, right. Okay.
We'll have 2 separate ordinances.
Right. So they'll all be clumped together, Member Fall. Thank you,
Okay.
Clerk Walker. Any further comments? Okay, thank you. That ends Finance and Personnel.
Okay. I think that we are closed for the evening, and I don't see any chats or questions amongst the attendees. So we'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday night, February 1st.